Hello and welcome to Bergkamp Wonderland, an Arsenal podcast injury special. I'm Jason. I'll be presenting today. Not a fun podcast, unfortunately, but with yet another Arsenal injury crisis, we felt it was the right time to look at our current injury list in a little more detail. We're not going to go all over the last 8 years, because we'd be here forever, to be honest with you, so that's off limits. So it's just our current Arsenal injuries, and we're going to have a fan's point of view and a sports science point of view. And representing the fans is the Merthyr Midget. It's Guna Gimli.
You are so cheeky. The Merthyr Midget. Is that the best you can do?
No, I just couldn't read my handwriting.
You know I'm gonna come back at you next week with something a million times worse.
To be fair, that's part of the course. How are you today, pal?
I'm not too bad, actually. I've had a nice weekend away. Didn't do the pod on Thursday because I was at Wembley picking fights with someone called Poet, who has a YouTube channel. But rock and roll, gentlemen. I'm here.
Sweet. Good to have you on board, boy.
Thank you.
Nice. And now, our sports science specialist, it's the wonder from down under. It's Dom. Hiya, Dom.
How you going, Jace?
I'm good, thanks, pal. You all right?
I'm very well.
Sweet. You causing havoc down there?
No, I'm well behaved. You know that.
Bollocks.
I concur with Gimli. Well behaved. Well, right, okay. We're not going to mess about. Dom, can you tell us a bit about your sports science background, please?
Basically, I do a lot of work with strength and conditioning. I work with some high-performance athletes. A lot of what I do is probably more in the rehab field than anything. But yeah, so for all intents and purposes of the pod today, that's where most of my discussion and opinion will be based from.
And you're fully qualified in that respect as well, aren't you?
Yes.
Sweet. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail on that because Dom has a personal life and he wants to protect it. But again, he does represent sports science, and Gimli's going to represent the fans. And
Yay.
Yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to go straight into the current Arsenal injury list. And the first man on is currently back in training. But we just want to talk about it a little. And it's Theo Walcott. So, Dom, could you please discuss Theo Walcott's injury and the rehab process, etc., and your opinions on that, please?
Theo's is a big one. He obviously tore his anterior cruciate ligament against Tottenham in the FA Cup game, last year in, I think it was January, February time. That's one of the sort of bigger, more major injuries that you can do as a professional athlete, just because of the way that it will affect your biomechanics, or can affect your biomechanics even after you've rehabbed the injury, because you're basically, what you do is you're replacing the ligament with a tendon, which are two different things. So structurally it can weaken the joint, but also just because it is such a major injury to have, and you're without use of that part of your leg for so long, that you'll get some muscle wastage as well. So even though the actual injury may only take about 3 to 4 months to heal, it's going to take you another anywhere between 6 and 8 months to be rebuilding the strength back up in the leg to be able to get it working as it once was. So he's coming towards the end of that. There was a little bit of talk that he's had a setback, but that's not true at all. Anything under 6 months with an injury anything under 12 months, getting back and playing within 12 months from an injury like that is about the average. It is getting a little bit better as the sports science and the rehabilitation process is getting more advanced. However, when you do an ACL, generally, you'll know this, Jace, generally you will also probably nick a little bit of your meniscus cartilage and or maybe a medial or a lateral ligament as well. So a lot of the times you're not just recovering from one particular injury. There'll be a couple of different things that you've got to deal with. So he's definitely not, it's not too much of a worry that it's taking him a little bit longer, and he's going to get held back. He's the type of player that that the staff are going to take every precaution with and make sure that when he comes back, he's at 100%, so it decreases the risk of doing any more injuries.
Cool. Gim,
Yes.
your thoughts on Theo, please?
I think the main thing is with Theo, it's really sad because someone that we've seen grow up in an Arsenal shirt, and we never seem to have got the best out of him in the capacity that we've never really seen him in full flow for a whole season. Very much in the same sense as Kieran Gibbs. I think, it's really sad that when he was just starting to click with Ozil in the team, that he got the injury, unfortunately, against those horrible bastards up the road, and we haven't seen him since then. I think what is sadder as well is that it doesn't look like we're going to see Walcott and Ozil play in the same team until maybe around Christmas, if not even after.
Yeah, true. What are your thoughts on? I mean, he was due back. There were rumours that he was due back for the Tottenham game. Did you feel that? Oh no, there's another problem with him?
I think first and foremost, you see it like with Jack Wilshere's injury as well. When Jack Wilshere came back from that year out, I feel personally as a fan, they tried to push him back into the team too quickly, which caused other injuries and setbacks. I'd like to think that, and I think that they will, with Walcott, manage him and the injury over time, just integrate him slowly, maybe give him 20, 30 minutes at the end of the game. I certainly don't think you'll see him start. But I think if it was a case of him returning to injury slower than they thought they would, it was definitely the best thing to do to put his appearances in the team back.
Cool. Dom, your thoughts on his apparent comeback a couple of weeks ago?
Well, he even, in an interview a while ago, someone asked him, about the Tottenham game, and he goes, "Yeah, I heard that, but that's not happening." So he would have known months ago when his expected date of return would be into the first team. And there's a long process with an injury like that. The longer you're out, the longer you need to spend in first team training before you're going to be able to put your hand up for selection. So he knew ages ago that Tottenham wasn't going to happen. And, when he got asked the question, very quickly said, no, that's not going to be happening. So I'm not really too sure where a lot of I think it came from Arsene Wenger, where he said that Theo would be back into first team training the sort of end of September, start of October, which is about what's happened. So I think people assume that as soon as Arsene says he's back in first team training, that he's automatically available for selection. But he's going to need, 4 weeks of first team training before he's even going to get a sniff at playing 20 minutes off the bench. So I really don't think that it's been a setback at all. I think it's just people just maybe getting their wires crossed a little bit.
Okay, cool. Right, guys, at the end, after each player we go through, I'm going to ask you, could the club have prevented this injury? I'm going to go to Gimli first in this, please. Gim, do you think the club could have prevented Theo's injury?
No, I don't think they could have, to be honest. I think it was just one of those. It was a nasty one. These type of injuries happen in football. And I don't think, no, there wasn't anything we could have done to prevent Theo Walcott's injury.
Brilliant. Dom, yourself?
No, not a chance. There was, I did remember reading something saying that, and it came from someone, with some kind of pedigree in sports science too, that said, if his muscles weren't as fatigued, then they would have been able to contract to brace the joint and so on and so forth, which is, in my opinion, an absolute load of crap, because the force that went through that guy's knee, because of the pace that he was running at and the angle that his knee was at, it would have broken 10 out of 10 ACLs regardless of how big and strong you are. So there's no chance that was preventable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big impact injury, isn't it? And
yeah,
and when it goes, it goes. I mean, I know Matt Gimli knows as well. We've both done our ACLs, and it's not fun.
No, definitely not.
Okay, guys. Now we're going to go on to another guy who's back in training today, and it's Serge Gnabry. Dom, fire away.
This is one that I really don't know much about. I know that it was a knee injury, but there wasn't really too much that I've seen anyway about what exactly had happened. I'm just going to assume that it was some kind of ligament injury, maybe similar to what Mesut Ozil was going through at the moment. But other than that, I'm not really too sure what the extent of his problem was. I mean, he's going to find it tough to get first team minutes anyway, isn't he, at the moment, with Theo coming back in a similar position, with Sanchez and Chamberlain also available to play those wing positions. So, yeah, look, I really don't know too much about Gnabry's injury other than that it was a knee injury and that it's definitely one that's taken its time to get right.
Okay, cool. Gim?
Yeah, I think Dom is spot on with that. I think had it been someone that was continually playing first team football, I think everybody probably would have got over themselves with, you know, how angry another player injured. But because we have so much cover in that position, you know, like Dom said, the Ox, Sanchez, you know, to name a few, Theo coming back, I think it was one of those that, you know, again, these things happen.
Yeah. I mean, I've read very little about him, how the injury actually happened. So, you know, asking you guys if it's preventable or not is a bit pointless, to be honest with you. So,
I would still say no because of the nature of the injury, because
right.
it would have been a ligament strain or tear or something like that, and they're very, other than, you know, not playing, they're very rarely they're part and parcel of playing. So I'll stick my neck out and say that it probably wasn't.
Oh, I like it when you stick your neck out. Oh, brilliant. Okay, Gim, do you want to come in on that?
No, I just think if to say it was preventable or not, I'm sat here in the same as you guys. I haven't read much about the injury. I don't know much about the injury, whether that's down to it being brushed under the carpet by the club for whatever reason, or just because, again, to reiterate, it wasn't an important first team player. I don't know, but I'd be naive if I sat here and said yes, it was or it wasn't. So I really can't comment on it.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Right, on to our captain, Mikel Arteta. Dom.
This one is one of the injuries that concerns me. Anytime someone gets repeat injuries in the similar area, especially when you get a player around 30 or over and they start straining calf muscles, and this isn't the first time this has happened. He struggled with it all last season, and it's known as the quote unquote old man injury. So really difficult one, to be honest. And this is one of the reasons why I was so frustrated that we didn't get a defensive midfielder in the summer, was because I didn't have faith in Arteta the same as I don't have faith in Diaby to stay fit. So it was always going to be a big ask for Mikel Arteta to play the majority of the year, or expect him to, and put that kind of, you know, physical pressure on him to be able to stay fit too. It doesn't really matter what condition the guy's in or how much training he does. He's just at that stage now where, unfortunately, he's just starting to pick up these strains, and they just, once it starts happening, it's very difficult to reverse the process. So, yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, just to clarify on that subject there, as you said, it doesn't matter what condition he's in. We saw pictures of him pre-season, ripped. You know, the guy, he's obviously put a lot of hard work in on the off-season. So no matter how hard he works, you know, when those calves start going, he's going to continually have problems, you're saying?
Yeah, basically, when you strain or tear a muscle, scar tissue builds up. It's like having a rubber band with little noduley, sticky parts on it. The rubber band's not going to stretch and contract as well as what it normally would. And so you've got these little hard balls of scar tissue that build up in these nice long strands of muscle fiber. And so when you're running and you're going through the contraction or concentric and eccentric process of running, where the muscle tightens and loosens, you're more at risk of re-injuring it again. So that's why I'm always more concerned in how players come back from injuries, and if they have sort of similar issues again or not, rather than how or why they got injured in the first place. So for him, this is something that he's had for best part of 2 years now. And because of those little build-ups of scar tissue, he's much more likely to keep re-injuring it. And there's not really much you can do to get rid of the scar tissue. You can do some massage and stretch and little bits and pieces, but once you've got a strain or a tear there, it's there forever.
Okay, cool. That's brilliant. Thank you. Gim.
I think on Arteta, my opinion is this is a player that is approaching the twilight of his career. I think when you see older players at other clubs, they're managed to the point that maybe they don't train as much, or maybe they don't get the game time that, say, first team players normally would do because of their age. Now, however, I think, as Dom already said, it's naive that in central defensive midfield we've got two guys in their 30s, that the Premier League is a very physical league. Mikel Arteta is not a defensive midfielder, and I think it's one of those things that he's going to pick up injuries. There should be a guy, so a 23-year-old strapping central defensive midfielder that was brought in the summer. However, unfortunately, we all know sat here that wasn't the case, and I think we're paying the price for that now.
Okay, that's a fair point. I think a lot of people feel that way. I know I do. So on Arteta then, guys, I'll start with you, Gim, first. Do you think that injury is preventable?
Yeah, I do, actually, because, again, going over my point, I think had you have signed someone in the summer to cover that position, I think maybe he wouldn't get an injury because he wasn't playing the game time that maybe he has done.
Okay, cool. Brilliant. Dom?
I'm going to sort of agree with Gimli on that one. I think that the prevention doesn't come down to the conditioning. It doesn't come down to the medical team. It doesn't come down to incompetence on their behalf. I think it comes down to the fact that you can't expect a 34-year-old or 33-year-old guy who's not really never been that much of an athlete anyway. He's not a guy that gets up and down the pitch that well and never has been. To ask him to do that kind of work in that position at his age with his injury history, there's too many ticks there to not have panic stations to think that was always going to be okay.
Okay, cool. Gim, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out as well that this is a player that has been, for the majority of his career, playing a lot of games each season, because he's been, when he was at Everton, he was kind of their talisman, wasn't he? He was the man that scored most of their goals, and he was one of the first names on the team sheet. So it's not as if, like, say, a player like Thomas Rosicky, who has had an easy career where you play, or Abu Dhabi, where you maybe play half a season and spend the other half out injured. He's had a long, hard career, and at the end of that, I think, backing up what Dom said, going back to what I just said, it's likely that he will pick up injuries.
Okay, cool. But his hair is always immaculate.
Well, I think that's all that matters.
Come on. I wish I had hair like him. Right, okay, so that's Mikel Arteta done. On to the Welsh wonder, Aaron Ramsey. Dom.
This one's going to cause a little bit of controversy because I have seen people state that all soft tissue injuries are preventable, and it's good that this one follows on from Mikel Arteta, because both of those guys, and people usually point to fatigue, don't they? When you talk about soft tissue injuries, they're overplayed, they're overtrained, that's why they've done it. Well, both of these guys went off before half time, and it's reasonably early in the season. So, that kind of throws a bit of a spanner in that argument where it's fatigue that's doing this, because before 45 minutes, both of them were off for different reasons too. So I'll go into Aaron Ramsey's into just a little bit more detail so people don't think that I've completely lost the plot when I say that, a soft tissue injury like a hamstring injury can sometimes not be preventable, or that it wasn't due to fatigue. And it comes down to a few different things. So I'll get a little bit scientific just for a second, then I'll try to explain it a bit better. There's a thing called proprioceptors in your body. And basically, the best way to explain those is that if you're walking down the street and you start to turn your ankle in a bit of a hole, or you fall down a curb or something, and you kind of stop and catch yourself before it fully rolls, that's your proprioceptors sending a signal to your brain to say, this is going through a range that's unsafe and it needs to stop, so things tense up. That happens throughout your whole body. So if you were under a general anesthetic, I could get you a leg and put it right above your head with no damage done, because you're unconscious and those proprioceptors aren't awake to tell me not to do that. You're stretchy enough to be able to do it. Now, when you're running around doing sport or just doing normal activities, those proprioceptors are usually awake and switched on. And so when you overstretch, that's where you feel things get tight. What Aaron Ramsey did when he did his hamstring was he overstretched reaching for a ball. So when you tear a muscle, it's a combination of load and it being stretched past the point that it's safe being stretched past. So if you were conscious and I just grabbed your leg and tried to push it above your head, everyone knows that it's going to get to a point where you go, that's enough, I can't let that stretch any further because it gets tight and it hurts. If you kept pushing past that, you'll tear the muscle, which is basically what Aaron Ramsey's done. So it's not necessarily down to fatigue. It was just down to the fact that he overstretched for a ball too far and his proprioceptors turned on to say that's enough. But because he kept stretching, the muscle damaged. So there's a little bit of a scientific explanation for that one. However, it's still hard to actually diagnose exactly what happened. But to what I saw and the fact that it happened before 45 minutes in the game, it wasn't down to fatigue. And he wasn't. It's a little bit different if a hamstring goes when you're just running along at top speed and you see players fall to the ground and reach to the back of their leg. They're the ones that I get worried about, a little bit similar to what Podolski did the other season. So, yeah, I'm not sure what you think, Gimli.
I think with Ramsey, and of course I can never say what a player's physical condition is, but for me there was certainly an amount of worry after he got injured in the previous one before now's Interlaw, when he played for Wales. I don't know what the injury was, but he came off in quite a bit of pain, and I can't help but feel that maybe he was rushed back a little bit too soon, or maybe he might have had a little bit of a niggle. I don't know if you can back that one up, Dom.
I think he turned his ankle on the AstroTurf, as we call it, the crappy surface over there. It can, but I don't think in this case it did because, like I said, it was more overstretching than it was. He wasn't sort of carrying the ankle injury to the 89th minute and then ended up with an imbalance in his running, so therefore a hamstring went. It was more that he was overstretching. And like I said, if you stretch far enough when you're conscious and the proprioceptors have turned on and tensed the muscle, something's going to tear.
I'm just saying how maybe a fan might have seen it.
Yeah,
or,
absolutely. I saw that on Twitter as well. I saw people saying that he's been overplayed or he's overtrained or he's played too many minutes or it was the Welsh game that he carried a knock into the game. But he came off a rest, don't forget, because of the suspension that he had in the Champions League. So that's just an example, I guess, that, it's not always as simple as saying fatigue causes soft tissue injuries. They're all preventable.
And I also think that you've got to point out with this one is Aaron Ramsey is a player that never went to the World Cup. So when he started the season, no, not because of you, Jason. I'm not trying to be funny. It just comes naturally. But this is a player that had a free summer all to himself. He could have done whatever he did. He didn't have to play any football. So you can't use the same excuse as say with a Mesut Ozil that he was tired coming off the back of a World Cup.
And that goes as well for Mikel Arteta,
Yes, of course.
Another guy who's had the summer off. So the fatigue aspect of it, I kind of don't get. It's very early days in the season. They're actually just getting match fit around now. So that's one part of that. Okay, Gim, I'll start with you on this again. Preventable or not? And this is, and bear in mind, this is from an aspect of could the club have done anything to prevent this, in your opinion?
Apart from not playing him as much, which I don't know how much of help that would have had with the injury itself, or I don't think it was a case of him being overplayed, as we just said. So no, again, I'll probably have to say no, that the club couldn't do anything about this one.
Okay, cool. Dom.
I agree. I think short of saying, "Oh, well, you better put Aaron Ramsey on the bench." Why is that? Is he okay? Yeah, he's fine, but he might hurt himself. You can't do that. You can't do that with players, especially a good one. So if he was fit to play and he felt fine going into the game, there's no fatigue aspect in this one for me. I'm not so sure that the club would have been able to do too much. I think it's just been a culmination of the fact that him and Arteta both went down within 5 minutes of each other that made it probably look a lot worse than it actually was.
Okay, brilliant. Right, okay, so now next man up is Nacho Monreal. Now, I know he was on the bench against Chelsea, but I still want to go into Nacho as he had a bit of a back problem. Dom, fire away.
I think this is a little bit similar to an Arteta one for me, where I think that this has been a niggle that he's had previously as well. And back injuries are really funny ones where, if you have a disc that protrudes or bulges and it puts pressure on the nerves, what happens is the muscles around that area spasm and they tighten to protect the joint. And it can be really tricky to try to get right. So it's a tough one. I probably don't know enough about exactly what has gone on with his back problem, but I do think it's reoccurring. So it definitely is a little bit more of a concern to me because if you start getting problems with your back, generally that will lead to other areas, especially hamstrings. So it's definitely a little bit more of a concern than what it sounds like.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I've had back issues in the past, etc., and smashed up my knees and what have you. And I understand the fact that everything's related, everything works off that spinal cord, etc. So, you are going to have problems there. Gim, your thoughts on this?
Again, I don't think it's one that the club could have done much about. I think it's just one of those things, like Dom said. I think it's been fairly high profile that he's had a constant niggle. Now, whether that could have been managed better, whether he could have, again, it's not really with him being overplayed because he's kind of rotated that position with Gibbs. So it is a funny one, isn't it? I mean, I don't think there's anything that they could have done about it, and it's just, I think the word is unfortunate.
Okay, cool. Dom, your thoughts on preventability?
Like I said, it's a tough one because I'm not really sure exactly what he's done. If it's what I think it is, then it's probably preventable with certain treatments, certain long-term training modifications and things that he could do a little bit more individually. But other than that, I'm not really so sure.
Okay, cool. Right, on then to the scoring sensation that is Yaya Sanogo. Dominic, take us away.
I honestly don't even know why he's out. I've paid no attention to his injury whatsoever.
According to the club website, it's a hamstring issue.
Okay, so he's still got the hamstring issues. This is another one where he, just going on from Monreal, he did have back problems a while ago, didn't he? That they were, and even though I think that was just so he could go and build up some strength over a 12-week period and do some strength training. But even then, the hamstrings are all related to that area. And so if it can just be a flow-on effect. He did have a bit of a hamstring niggle really, really early, and I think it was one of our preseason games. And I'm just wondering if he's struggling to get back from that. So, again, you can't really point to fatigue and being overtrained and overplayed when you do a hamstring in preseason. So, I'm not so sure what's going on with him, to be honest.
With bearing in mind he's a young guy, and we did send him off last season for the conditioning sessions to get him ready for Premier League football. Would that have had an effect on his biomechanics?
I think definitely. I think when you got to remember, like I've said before, these athletes are so highly strung and they're in such, ridiculously fine line conditioning that if you go and put, and I'm talking in kilograms here, but if you go and put sort of 5 or 6 kilograms on a frame, which is, 10 pounds or so, it's a lot of extra weight for the human body to be carrying around. And if you're doing explosive movements like jumping, sprinting, changing of direction, and you put that amount of weight on someone, there's going to be a weak link, especially if you do that in a short period of time, because normally it will take, it's a slow process to build that muscle. You look at Jack Wilshere at 19 compared to what Jack Wilshere looks like now, and people said that, he's gotten too big, he's gotten too muscular. It's just the natural process of a footballer and a professional athlete is going to, bulk up over time. And so by doing that too quickly, which is what, potentially Sanogo's done, is that you're putting an extra however many kilograms or pounds on a frame and asking that to still be able to move and do the explosive movements that it was without anything going wrong. There's always going to be a weak link in a chain. If I put a weight vest on you and told you to run around, even if it's only 5-10 pounds, it's going to be very noticeable. So for a highly strung athlete, it's going to be very, very noticeable.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. Gimli.
I think with Yaya Sanogo, he was one of the players that was touted as a gamble when he was signed for the club. I mean, has he done am I right in saying a broken tibia or fibula?
No, hamstring issue.
No, when he was at Auxerre.
I think he had an ACL injury, Jim. I think that's what he was he was out with, which can definitely upset your biomechanics.
And I'm sure he's broken a fibula or a tibula or one of those. I'm definite of it. But yeah, going back to what I was saying, he was one of those players that was signed as a gamble. I think that's exactly what he is, and I don't think it's a gamble that's paid off. You could liken him to Abu Dhabi, I suppose, in a way that he never seems to get much game time under his belt. But I think as a player, he's just one of those that's gonna have the recurring injuries, and I don't think there's anything you're gonna do about it.
And do you think those recurring injuries are down to lack of playing time and being on the bench constantly coming back and forth?
I just think that that's the kind of player that he is. If you can remember back to players like Jamie Redknapp or Darren Anderton, players that just seem to be injured more than they were playing, I think that's exactly the kind of mould that you're going to be looking at with Sanogo.
Okay, cool. Do you think his hamstring injury is preventable?
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
Cool. Dom?
Preventable or not?
Yeah.
It's a tough one. With his ACL injury, it like Gimli said, massive gamble to bring in a kid coming off an ACL injury. The advantage that they've got is that he is quite a young guy. He's got time to try to improve all of those imbalances that he may have gotten. But because he's such a big, tall, gangly lad and he's still growing and he's still filling out, there are likely to be a lot of these types of niggles and things. And it's almost like there was too much of expected or put on him too quickly because our lack of options. It would have been better to be able to bring him in, give him a few cup games and put him out on loan somewhere and let him get a run of games somewhere else. But preventable or not, I'm not sure. I really don't know.
Okay, cool. No problem. There's some we just don't know the answers to. This is the thing. We're trying to be as factual as possible during this podcast, and the guys are giving very honest opinions. It's not a laughy, jokey one as we normally do. It's purely about the injuries, and if we don't know the answer, we're not going to try to pretend that we do.
Well, I think the with that, Jace, is that if I can sit here and honestly, scratch my head and not really know if it was a preventable thing or not, then I'm not sure how people on Twitter can just automatically jump to the conclusion that it's the manager's fault or the fitness staff's fault and think that they're right. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
I do think, though, in today's society with social media and whatnot and people seeming to make up fake quotes and whatever, and I feel there's an overwhelming need to point the finger or place the blame. And I think when it's so public, it's easily done and it gives people the capacity to do it very easily. So I think that's where you get all the backbiting and the suggestions and the people that think that they know better than either the club or someone that knows about injuries like yourself, Dom.
Yeah, I'm combined with that, guys. People say things in the heat of the moment. Let's be honest, it's a passionate game. There's lots of things happening and people get upset at certain things. I can fully understand that. But again, when you scratch the surface, when you dig down and you try to look at it in a scientific manner or a factual manner, you've got to have a cool head looking at it. And this is what we're trying to do with this podcast today. And that's why you guys are on board with me. Okay, we're going to go on now to Mathieu Debuchy. And Dom, if you'd like to take us away on that, please.
Really strange injury, this one. This one's up there with Olivier Giroud's in its rarity and its weirdness, I guess you could call it, where I know people are going to probably throw things when I say this, but unlucky. Really, really unlucky that a guy turns and sort of starts sprinting back towards his own goal and in the process goes over his ankle and his whole body weight going over his ankle resulted in a ruptured ligament. I remember Chris messaging me on WhatsApp nearly instantly as soon as it happened. And on replay, I looked at it and thought to myself, well, that's a ruptured ligament. And just the way that he went over and the angle that he went over, straight away I knew that it was a bad one because there's a major ligament on the outside of your, there's two major ones on the outside of your ankle called the anterior inferior tibiofibular ligament and the anterior taliofibular ligament. And it would have been one, if not both of those, that he's injured, probably the latter, where he's fully ruptured it. And it's such a major ligament in the ankle that's why he's going to take so long after surgery to reattach it and stay in a moon boot and let it heal and go through a pretty big rehabilitation process. But again, it's, I saw people on Twitter trying to point blame at certain things as to whether it be the fitness staff, the manager, whoever, about that injury. But if anyone can tell me how you prevent rupturing a ligament by running, I'd love to know, and I'm sure the club would too. So it's one of those ones that I know that it's going to really annoy people, me saying, but it's just, really, really dumb luck. You're unlucky if you get one of those types of injuries a year, and we've managed to get about 3 within the space of 2 weeks.
Oh, cool. But I think again, when you saw it happen, you can't manipulate the pitch so that doesn't happen. You have to give a flat playing surface because this is what these guys play on. And when you jar your feet like that, sometimes bad things happen. Gimli.
Yeah, again, I don't think there's really much that I can add to what Dom said on that. It's just an injury, a nasty one, very, very unlucky. And all I can think at the moment is just how lucky we are to have Callum Chambers being able to fit in that position. Otherwise, I don't really know where we'd be.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? So, Gim, on the matter of is it preventable or not?
Oh, definitely not. No, I don't think. Not unless you're saying, the pitches in the game today are the finest playing surfaces you will find in any sport throughout the world. I don't think there's any way that you're going to prevent something like that, as Dom pulled out. It's just unlucky. Just unluck.
Yeah. Dom, preventable?
No, not a chance.
Cool. Okay, so next we're going to go on to our other Frenchman, Olivier Giroud. Dom, take us away.
Similar in the fact that it's just freakish. It's a freakish injury. The fact that he had his foot slightly in the air, the ball hit the end of his foot, and the shockwave travelled up his foot and had to end somewhere, and it just ended in the base of his ankle joint, and it put a fracture in his base of his tibia, which is the main leg bone that is the attachment of your ankle joint. So similar to if you were to fall over and straighten your arm to brace yourself for impact, it might not be your hand or your wrist that goes, it can be your shoulder popping because the shock travels all the way up your arm and has to continue on somewhere. So really, really freakish injury that 999 times out of 1,000, he doesn't feel anything and the ball gets kicked into his foot or leg and it just goes out of play and he carries on. But that one freakish, 1 in 1,000 that happens, it seems to just happen to us. And lo and behold, he's going to be out for, till the new year. So, and he's not a guy that is an injury-prone person. He's a guy that doesn't really get injured, soft tissue injuries and things. He cops a fair bit of, physical abuse when he plays. He's a very physical player, and yet he gets kicked in the foot with the ball, and that's what breaks his foot. It's baffling, and you just got to shake your head sometimes. But again, I think, like Gimli said earlier, that people get frustrated, and you need an outlet for your frustration. So that's where the finger pointing starts. But this one, there's you can't possibly point the finger anywhere.
I know. I mean, we was on Skype watching that Everton game, talking whilst watching it. And I remember starting screaming at him, get up and get on with it. We can go and win this game. And, it just didn't seem as if anything major had happened. And yet, lo and behold, it's a rather nasty injury. Out for 3 months. Gim, what are your thoughts on it?
No, again, very, very similar to you. I remember sat down watching it with a missus, and he went down, quite heavy after the ball hit him in the foot. I remember shouting at the television, "Get up, you Gret Puff!"
I think I may have said the same words.
No, I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, but again, I think it's another one of those that's just really, really unlucky. You could go a whole career and not get one of them. In the way that it's happened. So, I think it's just a complete write-off, really. It's not anybody's fault. If you're trying to blame anybody, you've got to say maybe the player that kicked the ball at him, but that's football, isn't it? Really, it is one of those. like Dom said, you just got to shake your head and go, oh, Jesus.
Sod's law, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so preventable?
No.
No.
Cool.
No.
Okay, so next we're going to go on. There's a Daily Mirror report today that that's been reported by other various news organisations that Laurent Koscielny has been sent back from the French squad with chronic tendonitis in both ankles. So Dom, I know we've spoken about this recently. Fire away. What are your thoughts on this?
First of all, it wouldn't be like a newspaper article to ham something up a little bit, would it? And say chronic, using the words chronic tendonitis in both ankles. Because if it was chronic tendonitis in both ankles, he wouldn't have been allowed to leave in the first place. So I think you need to kind of take that with a little bit of pinch of salt as far as the severity of what the newspaper article is reporting. Because if it was that bad, don't make any bones about it. We would have been playing, a Hector Bellerin at right back and putting Callum Chambers in at centre back. And if it was that bad, they're not going to risk someone like Laurent Koscielny doing proper damage to a part of his body just for the sake of playing through a 90-minute match. They would have seen it as a good opportunity to give him a rest and have 2 weeks off with the French games. But I can't remember, was it you, Jace, telling me that they're kind of obligated to send the players away and it's up to the French medical team to pass him fit or not?
Basically, under FIFA rules, it doesn't matter if a player's actually retired from international football. There was an incident with Makelele and the French squad where they called him up and he'd retired from international football, but under FIFA rules, he was ineligible to play for Chelsea because he hadn't fulfilled his national obligations. So they have to rock up if they are fit.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's news to me.
Yeah, so I think that's where a little bit of confusion lies when it comes to, Mesut Ozil going away to the German national team. And then, the people are saying, well, why couldn't our medical staff, manage to diagnose that? But with the timeline, I'm sure we'll get to that one in a minute, but with the timeline, these players just finish a game, probably don't get time to have a scan to get results before they have to head off on planes and things to go to international duty. So sometimes the club are just going to say, look, do us a favour, he's a bit sore, can you give him a scan or do an MRI or an ultrasound or whatever it needs to be to see what's going on? And if he isn't fit to play, then you can send him home again for treatment. So with Laurent Koscielny, I think the tendonitis is just bad enough that he is probably taking a bit of a precaution to be able to get a bit of a rest in. This is something that I'd picked up on a long time ago. I'm not sure if people listening will remember, but there was a game, I can't remember which game it was, but I said on the podcast, don't be surprised if Koscielny sits on the bench and Callum Chambers is at centre-back, because I remember him having a little bit of a flare-up or a bit of a niggle, and you could see him just sort of hobbling a little bit at the end of a game. I'm not sure it's chronic in both Achilles. I think it's more so in one than the other from the way that he's sort of hobbled around and from what we know so far. But I've got a few questions, one from our very own American friend Thomas, who asked me if it's a cause for concern for playing him through it if he's going to end up with any major problems with it. And the answer to that's sort of, it's going to surprise people, but the answer is kind of no. With a tendonitis, it's a pain thing. It's an inflammation of the area. It's not necessarily slightly damaged. If you had a slight tear in something and you play through that, then the chances of you tearing it fully or rupturing or getting a bigger tear are obviously increased. But with a tendonitis, it's going to just be a discomfort and a pain thing. And it's, especially with your Achilles, very painful. So he definitely needs some rest, and he definitely needs to be able to be managed through the injury, because it won't get better without rest. That's one of those tough things that you can keep playing him, but his performance is going to be down and his movement's going to be down, and it won't get better until he gets a break. So as far as risking his long-term health or whatever for playing him, it's a tough one, but you can kind of play through that to an extent. What it can do is if you're favouring it too much, it can upset your biomechanics to where you're hobbling or limping or favouring one leg more than the other. And that's where you can actually do a soft tissue injury because of the fact that you're overloading other areas that you shouldn't be, because of the fact you're favouring your Achilles or favouring that particular part of your body. So in that respect, there's definitely probably a little bit more of an increased risk, but As far as to the injury of the Achilles itself, not so much.
Okay. And reverting back to the Chelsea game, where Costa outran Koscielny, which I found, with Koscielny's pace, I would have thought he would normally have covered him and caught up with him. No problem there. Even though it's a fantastic ball through. Do you think that maybe the club are mismanaging Koscielny with this injury?
I mean, to go back to your original question about the newspaper and what they're reporting, I think from vast experience of speaking to journalists through doing the podcast, I think there is a large amount of making something sound worse than it is to get clicks or to sell newspapers. So until someone comes out from the club and gives me this is the situation, it's not something that I'm gonna be worrying about, if that makes sense. But to answer that question, I think it's certainly been clear to me over the last month that Koscielny has been carrying or struggling with something. I mean, you see reports on Twitter and Arsene Wenger coming out saying, maybe he isn't going to be fit for this game or completely being written off from the game at the weekend. And then all of a sudden he's going out and playing the game and playing 90 minutes. Now, you've got to say that the mismanagement of that injury comes from not having anybody else to cover that position. Therefore, the club or Arsene Wenger is in that position where he has to play. I do think when they first discovered the injury, they could have gone, right, we'll stick him on the bench and say, just for argument's sake, we would still have Thomas Vermaelen. Put Thomas Vermaelen in the team. I don't think maybe we'd be in the situation with Koscielny that we are now if we had have been able to give him a rest.
Okay, cool. So Dom, on preventability, we've got a yes from Gim. It is preventable from the club's perspective, due to the club's responsibilities, etc. What do you think?
Absolutely agree. That was one that like I said, that I'd identified a while ago. Nearly going back to near the start of the season, where it was pretty evident that he was carrying something. And if you're selling Ignacy Miguel and you're loaning out Carl Jenkins, and then you sell Thomas Vermaelen and all you bring in is Callum Chambers. No knock on Callum Chambers, he's a great prospect and great young player. But that's three defenders that you're losing and you're bringing one in. It puts so much pressure, and I said this, it puts so much pressure on Mertesacker and Koscielny to be fit, and not only to be fit, but to play through knocks and to play through niggles. And, what choice does the manager have, where it's not even a lack of quality that we've got to bring in, it's a lack of numbers. There's just no one to bring in. So it's a tough situation to be in, and definitely a very, very avoidable thing that we didn't have to go through. But lo and behold, so I would definitely have to agree and say that it was preventable on the behalf that we should have cover.
Okay. Yeah, spot on. It is, sorry to follow that up, but it is
No,
negligence from the manager, and it's got to be. You can't have, like Dom's just said, ship so many players out, because Giroud was another player that went out officially this summer, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So, you've lost, to add him to Mikel and Jenkinson, if you had Jenkinson still at right back, I know a lot of our fans are seriously on his back for, maybe not being as good as he should be to go in the team. However, then you can have Callum Chambers to take the weight off Mertesacker and Koscielny. So from that point of view, it's utter negligence by the club to not go out and strengthen in the positions that need strengthening.
No, I think that's a great point as well, because obviously, we want this to be as factual as possible, and we want to represent everybody's opinion on the current situation. It's all well and good trying to be cold-hearted about everything we do, but it's a passionate game, and sometimes there is blame to apportion. Okay, because again, there is a numbers issue. I don't care what other clubs have got, in all honesty. It's about what we've got and how we manage our team. And I think it's fair. It's right that we do that we hold people to account. Okay, so the next player we got on our list is Mesut Ozil. Dom.
So Mesut Ozil has a slight tear of his lateral collateral ligament, which is the ligament that runs vertically down your femur to your tibia on the outside of your knee. There's one that travels the exact same way on the inside of your knee called your medial ligament. And then there's the ACL and the PCL, which are inside the knee joint and they cross over each other. So he's got a little nick in his outside ligament of his knee, which is a bit of a strange one to get. It's not something that is that common. To me, it's something that I guess, the knock was, why did we keep playing him? Why did we keep playing him through that game? He probably just thought it was just a bit sore and just a bit of a knock that he'd gotten, 40 times over the last 12 months playing in the Premier League, and thought that, okay, I'll run it off or it'll come good. So I don't think that there's too much fault can be sort of pointed at the club, or I know that he'd played a lot. I know that he'd come off a World Cup and that he was playing a fair amount of football for us, but it's one of those injuries where it was more of a case of players flying into him and tackling pretty severely every time he gets the ball, more so than just an overuse injury. So it's a point that I do want to bring up. I'm not sure if we're going to get onto it later, Jace, but as far as you want me to save that for later?
Yeah,
cool.
save that.
So we'll just go on through his. Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, basically his diagnosis will be that he will be in some kind of brace to allow that ligament to heal, so he's not moving the joint around too much. That'll probably last between sort of 4 to 6 weeks, and then after that, there's going to be a bit of a process of, again, when you immobilize a joint like that, you get some muscle wastage and some weakening. So he's going to have to spend some time strengthening that back up again, so that he doesn't have imbalances and he doesn't have any sort of soft tissue injuries as a result of having an immobilized joint.
Cool. Right. Gimli.
In terms of minutes played, I think the club have managed him very, very well. We're not here to talk about what position he's played in, because I think that's personally irrelevant to an injury podcast. But in terms of having managed him very well, I think you see players like Andre Schürrle at Chelsea that came back from the World Cup a week earlier than Mertesacker and Ozil and the rest of the German boys, and were playing absolutely fine and still aren't injured. So, I just think it's one of those things. Injuries happen. Unfortunately, it is one that the fans seem to get overhyped about, because he is our most expensive player. We know the criticism that he's at the moment, and I think there's a lot of people out there that believe in Ozil and don't like the rap that he's getting off of a portion of our fan base, so that we'll stick up for him. But so yeah, I do think it's just an unlucky one.
Okay, so on preventability?
No, I don't think it could have been prevented. Not at all.
Dom?
I'll be controversial and say yes, but not for the reason that people think it's going to come up later on. So it's nothing to do with I'll say on our behalf, as far as the club's perspective, no.
Cool. Okay. That's wrapped up that section where we've gone through each individual injury we have. There are 10 current people on that list that we've gone through. And everybody's agreed basically that of the 10, 2 were preventable by the club. 1 maybe a 50-50, but the other 7 is just dumb luck. I think that says quite a lot when you actually look at it in the cold light of day. So after the injury list, what we thought we'd look at is players in our current squad that we have concerns about. And we're going to start off with Dom on this, because obviously it's an educated perspective, and with the history of the players, he's going to go into this in a bit more detail. So Dom, would you like to carry on, please?
Yeah, so just sort of expanding on what I sort of mentioned earlier with the repetitive injuries, the ones that seem to come back, or the players seem to struggle to get over. They might put 4 or 5 games together before something happens again that's similar. So Kieran Gibbs is one, Mikel Arteta's one, and I would have to say the centre-backs are more of a concern for different reasons. But if we go to If we go to, so like I said, Mikel Arteta with these repetitive calf strains that he's getting, Kieran Gibbs has got repetitive hamstring problems that I'll get into a little bit more when we cover the biomechanics versus fatigue. I'll explain his in a little bit more detail because he's a good example of that. The Aaron Ramsey, he's got a hamstring. He had a quad last season. They're both soft tissue injuries, but both happened for different reasons. So it's not really too much of a concern. The concern for me is how he comes back from his hamstring injury. If he is able to come back and play and it doesn't cause him any problems, or is he going to end up like Kieran Gibbs, where it's something that he now struggles with for the next, portion of his career? And that's where the medical team and that's where the physios and the training staff will earn their crust. If they can get him back without too many problems, I think that's the other aspect of this that people don't take any, notice of, is that if you're going to slag the medical team and staff, you also have to give them some credit too. That if someone's able to come back from an injury and he hasn't had any, I know that he had a couple of setbacks with his quad injury, and I know that I spoke to somebody in the summer that has a little bit of inside information that said that Aaron was pushing himself really hard in training when he shouldn't be, and it went again because he was just so desperate to get back into the team. So it wasn't down to the staff overworking him or rushing him back too quickly. That was a player fault that people don't take into consideration as much, that could possibly happen. That, a player might not do what they're supposed to do or go a little bit too hard when they're not supposed to, or think that something's okay when it's not. So that's an aspect that we probably need to consider too. But also giving the medical staff credit where it's due. So if we can get players back and they don't have any more injuries, you never hear people say, oh, wow, what a fantastic job they've done. It's only ever when something goes wrong, and it's only ever criticism. So I just wanted to bring that up quickly. But as far as the concerns that we've got at the moment, I'd have to definitely say Arteta, Gibbs, and our centre-back situation definitely concerns me. Jack Wilshere to a different extent, not necessarily because of soft tissue repetitive things, but just because he's finally had a full pre-season. He's finally coming into a little bit of, fitness form as well as on the pitch as far as his game and his matches, his performance is concerned. So that concerns me more so because I just want him to be able to get through the whole season without being injured, because I think for his development, it's really important. So that's one that I guess the club needs to start to look at and manage really carefully, and try not to overplay him or put too much pressure on him to play too much, and make sure he gets rest, even if he doesn't want it, but make sure, because we do have players in that position that can cover. So that's one that I think I'll be keeping an eye on as well.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, you brought up there Ramsey training too hard to try to get back into the team. A lot of footballers, as you mentioned in Mesut Ozil as well, they pick up a knock and they don't really realise that what the damage they've done, because they've done it so many times before. And a great example of that, an extreme example of it as well, is maybe Bert Trautmann in the 1956 FA Cup final, where he was in a collision with one of the opposing players, and he actually dislocated 5 vertebrae and cracked one of them in his neck. The guy had a broken neck, and yet played on. And that's an example of, players' desire to just play the game. Gimli, what are your thoughts on this?
I think in terms of players pushing themselves, I think Aaron Ramsey this season in particular has been one of those players that I've looked at. And I think I've watched a little bit of Ramsey of old, where he's trying too hard, if that makes sense. And I was going to bring it up on a podcast 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I didn't because we were running short of time. But it always seems to me like he's trying so hard to do stuff, and he gets wound up, and the harder he tries, the more he pushes himself, and he kind of gets nowhere, and he gets frustrated. And I think, what Dom said is bang on. But I think probably out of all of the team, if I could just pick 2 names about 2 players that worry me, Kieran Gibbs, just for the fact that Kieran Gibbs, I think, is one of the most exceptional players at left back, and I think to a certain degree he has the potential to go on and be as good as Ashley Cole if he shakes the injuries off. I mean, I said to you the other day, didn't I? I was at Wembley and I watched him play at left back for England, and he was fantastic. I don't think until you actually go and see someone live at an Arsenal game or say an England match when they play, that you realise how much running these boys do. But the other player that worries me is Jack Wilshere. I just find myself hiding behind the sofa every time he gets tackled. And I think part of that is down to him being such a tricky technical player. I don't think that there's a better player in the Premier League at the moment that can twist and turn people as good as Jack Wilshere can, and can play quick, short passes, 1-2s to other players like Jack Wilshere does, that's a fantastic thing to be. However, you do find yourself being more susceptible to the late challenges because you played the ball so quick, and you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So them two, I think they always worry me for those reasons.
Okay, so we take this into account then, okay? You're looking at sort of Arteta and Gibbs on repetitive injuries, Wilshere down to playing style, etc. So, with the furore at the moment amongst the Arsenal fan base about the amount of injuries that we have, what do you do about these? Do you sell these players, replace them with big, strong guys who maybe aren't as technically gifted, but you won't get as many injury issues? Or do you put some faith in Forsythe and the conditioning team that they can solve the issues these players have? Dom?
It's a combination, I think. I think definitely, again, this is more of a personal opinion, but we are a pretty small technical side, and we have been for a while. This tiki-taka type of play, is fantastic. But in the Premier League, when things just get so physical, that you've got players that are a little bit smaller in stature that maybe struggle to take so much of the strain. But I'm sure we'll go down to playing style a little bit later when we talk about a few other things. But definitely selling, maybe not selling, but definitely bringing in that 6'2" defensive midfielder. I'm looking at you, Morgan Schneiderlin, because I've had a man crush on him for about 12 months.
He has.
But he would be absolutely perfect in that position because he's still technical enough to do exactly what Mikel Arteta does. We've seen that at Southampton even early in this season, how gifted the guy is on the ball and passing and even shooting on goal. But he's got the athleticism and he's got the physical strength to run around and kick people when he needs to and get himself into the position to be able to affect the play. That's something that Mikel Arteta can't do. He might, I've got no doubt that he's as far as football brain goes, he's probably one of the most intelligent players we have. But he can look at where he needs to be, but his body can't take him there. And that's a big thing. So, as when you said about selling players, maybe not necessarily selling Mikel Arteta, but not having him as first choice. Having him as someone that can play lesser teams where we know that it's not going to be so physical, but having someone like Schneiderlin in, and this is one of the reasons why I'm not huge on Khedira, because I don't think he has the physical attributes to be able to do what's needed in that position. So it's still a specialist type athlete that I'm looking at to come in to do that role. And most of it is down to the physical attributes of the player. So absolutely, when you talk about personnel, I think that we are a little bit too lightweight and we do need someone like that. And I mean, Arsene Wenger's even admitted that he's missing that type of player. There was definitely a few out there in the market. Why we didn't get one, I'm not sure. But that's one of the areas that I look at to think that, I remember the Dortmund game and their midfield at the time was, technically not as good as ours, but they absolutely monstered us. Every time we got the ball, those big, strong midfielders were all over us and we couldn't do anything about it. They knocked us off the ball, they dispossessed us, and then they launched counterattacks. We don't really have the players to do that. And I think that we do. We need that, especially in the Premier League and especially with 50-something games a season. Okay,
but again, I'm going to push you on this a bit more. You have the likes of Gibbs and you have the likes of Wilshere who've come through the ranks, okay? They've cost the club nothing, but they're no assets, okay? Do we have faith in the conditioning team in Forsythe coming in and being able to help them solve the continual of injury issues they've had?
I do. Personally, with those two individual players, I do. Maybe not so much with a Diaby or players a bit like that. But Wilshere and Gibbs definitely. With Theo coming back, I do, because they're younger. When you've got players that have got age on their side, they've got a little bit of extra time to overcome those types of imbalances, and we'll get to that. I'll talk about the imbalances. I know that I say that a lot, but I'll use some analogies and stuff a bit later. But when you've got players that are a bit younger, and I think that's why that we went out and bought Nacho Monreal at left back, was because he was one of the best left backs in the Spanish league at the time of us buying him, and I still think he is a fantastic left back too. He doesn't get the credit that probably he deserves, because the club, to some extent knew what Kieran Gibbs was like and couldn't really be trusted at the time of all that happening, because he kept having these persistent injuries. So they went out and got a pretty strong backup, pretty strong guy they knew they would have to use. But not only that, if Gibbs was feeling a bit iffy, they were more than confident playing Monreal for a stretch of games to give Gibbs time to be able to overcome those problems, because they are problems that do take a little bit of extra time. And it's a little bit similar to the reason I think Wilshere will be okay, because if he does need a bit of a rest and does need some bit of one-on-one attention and a little bit more specific training, we have depth in that position with, when Ramsey's fit, or even Chamberlain to go in there to be able to give him time and not put him under pressure to have to play. I think, we've mentioned before, going back to when he was younger, that we probably didn't have the same amount of options, that he got played 50 times in a season or something similar, that it may have, well, it did result in him getting a stress fracture in his foot. So now that we've got a little bit more depth in options, those guys, I think you would be silly to sell. You'd be absolutely crazy to get rid of Wilshere and Gibbs.
Brilliant. Gimli, would you like to come in there, please?
Yeah, I don't really think that there's an awful lot I can add to what Dom said there, because I've just been sat here like the Churchill dog through all of that. Yeah, I think on Shad Forsythe, I think, I see people on Twitter and they go, oh, he's been at the club X amount of months now and there's absolutely no change. Let me get this straight. I'm no injury specialist like Dom. I would never claim to be. But I understand that when someone comes in to do a job, you have the cleanup of what is there before. And I think that he is the right man for the job. I think he'll do a fantastic job when he finds his feet. And I don't think people have given him enough time. I think if in a year's time down the line, I think we'll all be sitting here saying how much of a good acquisition he has been. And again, to back up what Dom said, I think more than with the injuries, it's down to having strength in depth. When your player feels the niggle, he can be taken straight off. And you know that the player that you've got to replace him is as good as, if not better. I think if you rotate players, you manage them correctly, I think you can maybe not solve the problem, because injuries are something that are part and parcel to sport, especially with the way that Arsenal play the game. However, I think with players coming in, rotation, etc., you can certainly manage players to get less injuries throughout a season.
That makes perfect sense to me, to be fair. Dom, Gimli's mentioned Forsythe and the amount of time that it will take him to develop what he does within the club. Would you like to come back on that, please?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick little insight of, I think maybe some people are even confused at what his role is, or what his job title is, or what he actually does. He's a strength and conditioning performance athlete performance manager. So basically, I did see things on Twitter, and I'm going to bring this up just because it may be something that other people have seen, read, believe, or feel the same way. That I saw a few tweets saying that, well, it must be Tony Colbert still in charge because this wouldn't have happened if Shad Forsythe was, there must still be our old training techniques causing all of these things. And I just want to get something sort of straight, that's just an opinion of somebody. That opinions are a little bit like assholes. Everyone's got one, and most of the time they're full of shit. So make no bones about it. Someone like Shad Forsythe, who was the coach of the... You like that one, Jace?
I love that, mate.
It's as good as his Diaby one.
Oh!
I thought I'd better sneak something in there for the listeners today.
Oh, thank you ever so much. That was beautiful. Carry on.
But make no bones about it, Shad Forsythe, a guy that was the head honcho at the German national team, a team that surprised everybody in, I think it was 2012, with a tournament that they did fantastically at with a really young squad. He took, they went over to South America where not many Europeans do so well and won the World Cup and were extremely fit side in a very, very, hot, harsh conditions that not many of the other European teams managed to handle. And so this is a guy who is at the top of his game. He is one of the best in the world. He was chased after by Manchester United and Bayern Munich. He's not coming to Arsenal for any other reason than to be the man. There is no way in hell that he's coming to Arsenal to be somebody's number two. It's ridiculous to think that a guy of his stature would agree to doing that when... And you've got to give us a little bit of credit too, being able to get him here, because with Manchester United and Bayern Munich aren't mugs. They're going to have some pretty nice facilities, and so what he must have seen at Arsenal, and the fact that he would have been told, look, we want you to adopt your own philosophies and do things your own way. We're going to back you. That's what would have got it over the line to get him to go to the club. It wouldn't necessarily be a monetary incentive because all of those three positions would have paid extremely well. But the opportunity to enforce your own fitness philosophy and your own philosophy would have been the reason that he would have chosen to come to Arsenal. So I just wanted to get that pretty clear that he is the man. He is the number one head honcho. And I think it was either FK or our Andrew that said that he was taking all of the warm-ups before games and things, and he was out there on the field doing all of the drills and things. So he's very, very much the hands-on guy that's running the show there. So, but not, you got to remember, he only had 2 weeks of a pre-season with these players too. So he didn't get very long to be able to enforce and instill his own philosophies on things because he was at the World Cup. And so, and we've already just, discussed that this early in the season, we haven't had that many soft tissue injuries that are that much of a concern. Most of our injuries that have happened to our high profile important positions are the impact injuries that we can't do much about. So if you take all of those away and you focus on, what he may have had a hand in, there's not that much that's gone wrong that you could point the finger at Shad Forsythe. The only thing that I would look at is the management of Koscielny and Mertesacker, because I know that Mertesacker still was carrying a bit of a niggle a few weeks ago, but, regardless, had to play. And even then, I probably wouldn't point the finger at Shad Forsythe. If I was pointing the finger, I'd talk to the scouting network and Arsene Wenger and say, how come you couldn't find a third choice centre-back? So as far as pointing the finger at Shad Forsythe, I think it's, way too premature to be doing that. And it's also way too premature to be thinking that things aren't better, because we don't know that. It's way too early to tell that he hasn't had a very good impact on things. Who's to say that we wouldn't have had a bunch of soft tissue injuries and that Jack would have, broken down by now had it not been for him coming in and doing what he's done.
Yeah, it does seem as though a lot of people have a crystal ball when it comes to this sort of thing. And this is why we're doing this pod. You spoke about Forsythe. Tell me what would be the kind of relationship between the conditioning teams and the medical teams?
I'll speak in sort of generics here because, like I said, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows how many fitness staff we even have. How many physios we have, how many strength and conditioning coaches are at the club. I know that on the website it will have the major ones, but we don't know behind the scenes how many other staff are working in tandem to run the program, I guess is the best way to explain it. But generally you'll have the strength and conditioning coach or the high performance manager is probably a better way of putting what Shad Forsythe does. And he's going to have his own philosophy and a way of him wanting to do things. Now, when a player gets injured, the process would be to go into the treatment room, into the physios, and the physios will assess the injury, give it a diagnosis, do some scans and things, and figure out exactly what's happened. They'll then prescribe some certain exercises and some rehabilitation work. That will get done, in the gyms generally. And then it'll be up to the physio or the medical staff to then say, okay, the scans have now shown that it's all clear. They're free to go back and do some light work as far as X, Y, and Z goes. And then it's up to people like Shad Forsythe to make sure that they're not doing too much or too little, or they're doing just the right stuff when it comes to coming back into training. But like I've said before, you can have an all clear on a scan and everything's all good to go, and there should be no reason to be concerned. And then they'll go into training, but because they've been carrying a certain injury, something else goes because of imbalances. So even then, it's not necessarily down to the medical staff, because there's that much technology now. They've got that much information and instant feedback that they know. They're not guessing anymore. They're not guessing, I think their hamstring's recovered. They know. They can look at it on a piece of, on an MRI readout and know whether it's healed or not.
Great. And with that, I'm just going to expand at this point a little bit. Does player education come into this? Because we've spoken earlier on in the pod about how a player will have picked up a knock, etc., and it's something they've had before, so they're going to play on through and they're going to get through it and they'll get it seen to afterwards. Would these guys be educating the players as they go along?
I'm not sure. I would assume so, because it seems like a pretty obvious thing for me anyway to be doing, and it seems like a very important thing for me to be doing, where, you need to be educating the players on, what's good pain, what's bad pain, what, you might have felt a knock and you might have been tackled and gone down with a bit of a kick in the ankle, 100 times. But that's not to say that if you get a knock somewhere or similar or somewhere else and it feels a bit tender, that you don't straight away let the medical staff know, let the physios know, let the manager know. By the way, I've pulled up pretty sore. Even if it's after a training session, what doesn't matter, but just learning that you don't just zip your lip and try to push through it and think that it's going to be something that's all going to be okay, because what will happen is a 1 week injury can turn into 6 because you keep pushing through something, and lo and behold, you'll end up with a more serious injury because of that. It's not always the case, but it's definitely, a situation. I go back to Mesut Ozil's original hamstring injury against Bayern Munich that he did within the first 5 minutes and kept playing. And if you do a hamstring injury, a soft tissue injury within 5 minutes, again, does that point to fatigue, or does that point to going into the game with something wrong?
Okay, cool. Gim, would you like to come in on that?
I don't think there's anything I can really add to it. I'd just like to think that from a fan's perspective, for damage limitation, you'd hope that if a player felt a knock or a strain, or that they knew that something wasn't right, with an injury, that they'd signal to the bench straight away. And for the sake of aggravating something even more, that they get taken off the pitch, because as we've seen before with players, they've played through injuries. The injury has flared up, become worse, and maybe something that would probably see a player out for 3 or 4 weeks, and we're seeing a player out for, say 6 months. So you'd like to think from a fan's point of view that a player would signal to the bench to be taken off if they felt that something wasn't right. However, you've got to understand that these are young lads. They're pumped up, playing in front of crowds of, between 40 and 70,000 people, week in, week out, and that sheer adrenaline. Sometimes, you can be so pumped up for something, and you do play through injuries. So, I mean, you have to take that into account as well.
Yeah, there's that adrenaline side to it, isn't there? And we've all been there for that. Dom, final words on this to you.
Yeah, I know that I've spoken to you about this before, Jace, when we've discussed this, but professional athletes in all sports, across the world, you would struggle to find one that goes into a game feeling 100% fit and having no problems whatsoever. All of the players across the Premier League, not just at Arsenal, would be going in with a bit of a knock, a bit of a niggle, a bit of a strain, a bit of a sort of shoulder or a neck or a back that's tight, or purely because of the amount of exercise, the amount of load these guys put through their bodies is not natural to do. Hence why half of them can't walk when they're 40, because they're aging their bodies so quickly because of the work that they're doing, that for the people that haven't played, a high level of sport, probably don't realize that, probably don't really understand just the toll that it takes, and the fact that they're not going into games fresh as daisies, running around feeling on top of the world until something goes wrong. So it might be a little bit harder for them to distinguish what is just a bit of a knock or a niggle that I've been carrying for a few weeks, and what is actually serious to the point where, Mesut Ozil's torn his ligament in the side of his knee. I know that people might give him a bit of stick, but he's a tough kid. He tore his hamstring and played another 40-odd minutes before he came off at half-time against Bayern Munich. He had a slight tear in his lateral collateral ligament in his knee, which is extremely painful to move around on, and he played the rest of the game. That's where I guess player education can come into it. And I know that I've seen stats on him before where they say, well, he hasn't really been injured until he came to Arsenal. And from that perspective, it's true, but there are probably very good reasons for that, much more logical reasons than have been bandied about. However, it doesn't, stop the fact that he probably doesn't know. He probably hasn't had a lot of these types of knocks and injuries and things before to know what's actually serious and what's not. So there's that aspect to things as well, where I guess, basically, long story short, that a lot of these guys are going into a lot of games with some kind of niggle.
Yeah, I think anybody who's played sport, and you play on a weekly basis, you do pick up these niggles as you go along throughout the season. It's a fact of life. And you do kind of put it to one side, don't you? You just think, I'm moaning about nothing. Let's get on with it. And these guys are not going to be no different. Okay, so that's that section dealt with. We're going to go on to something now where we look at fatigue as opposed to biomechanics. You see a lot of people, especially on social media, basically getting their hair off about people being overplayed, etc. Especially with Mesut Ozil. Oh my God, we're playing him too much, so forth. I'm going to go to Dom on this first. Dom, fatigue versus biomechanics. Could you go into that in a bit more depth, please?
Okay, so basically, I think that when people get injured, the first thing that we seem to have a bit of base knowledge on is that, fatigue. We've heard it before, that fatigue causes soft tissue injuries. I've heard Roberto Martinez even say, or been quoted as saying, that every soft tissue injury is preventable. And that doesn't help these people with these agendas that say, every time we get a soft tissue injury that there's someone to blame for it, because it's not actually true. There are things that we call, player output, and tracking systems and GPSs and things. When a player here tore his hamstring, he got pushed, and that's how his hamstring went. And when you look at the data, he was moving at 3 times the pace that he could normally move in that short period of time because of the force that went through, and his hamstring just happened to let go because it couldn't cope with all that force. So that's a soft tissue injury that's gone for no other reason than he got pushed, and it was in a certain movement pattern that his body couldn't cope. And so there are a lot of soft tissue injuries that can happen like that, where players are running and get knocked and pushed off balance and things, and your muscles aren't designed to cope with that kind of force and impact. So this is where I'll bring up Kieran Gibbs as an example for the fatigue versus biomechanics. Because of his repetitive injuries through his hamstrings, what can happen there? I'll get a little bit scientific. What can happen is that, it's a biomechanical issue, not a fatigue issue, because he would have what's called an anterior pelvic tilt. So what that means is, if you think of your hips as a fishbowl, you basically want them to be nice and level so all the water in the fishbowl stays nice and still. What happens with an anterior pelvic tilt is your pelvis tilts forward on an axis, and so the water would start falling out the front of the fishbowl. What that does to your hamstrings at the back of your leg is it lengthens them. So you have these hamstrings that are loaded because of the fact that they're overstretched and they're used as an anchor muscle, that becomes the weak link. And so what's happening there is that he has an imbalance. His hip flexors are too tight and his lower back's too tight, which causes that pelvis to rotate forwards, which lengthens the hamstring. So now when he runs and he's doing all of these movements and putting force through his legs, he's already got an imbalance. He's already got a weak link in the chain. And that's the problem with biomechanics that people probably don't understand or don't take into consideration when it comes to soft tissue injuries. And yes, it's preventable to an extent, but it takes a lot of work to correct imbalances. It's a process that can take a long, long time. This is a guy that's been running around since he was, 7, 8 years old, kicking footballs, and has probably run with a certain style and a certain way of moving that it's very difficult to change once you get to a certain level. So, and the fact that he's training so much and he's running so much, doesn't really get the time to go and correct those imbalances. And there's only so much you can do anyway. So as far as prevention goes, you can do specific movements to loosen hip flexors, to loosen lower back, to keep things strengthened, to tighten up the hamstrings a little bit so they're not so overstretched. But I guess that's just a little example of how biomechanics can affect the soft tissue injuries just as much, if not more so, than fatigue, because you can have, say, a Mathieu Debuchy on the right-hand side running up and down the pitch just as much as Kieran Gibbs, and yet he won't do his hamstring. So do we look at fatigue there? Do we look and say, well, what's going on there? If it's fatigue, then why is one player able to do the same amount of work and pull up no problems, and yet the other guy can't? That's where the biomechanics comes into it, and that's where imbalances probably cause a lot more issues than what we give them credit for. So I thought I'd just use that as a bit of an example, maybe just to shed a little bit of light on the fact that it's not just as simple as saying soft tissue injury, preventable, he's been overplayed.
Cool. That's great. Gim, would you like to come in on that, please?
I don't really, again, think that there's an awful lot I can add to what Dom said. Reiterated already in the podcast, I think, that there could be competition for places and giving players rest. But in today's world, you'd like to think that players wouldn't be getting fatigued this early in a season. I think, to be honest, it's a poor excuse to say that like Mesut Ozil will come back from a World Cup fatigued. Do you know what I mean? These guys are professional athletes, and I know they have hectic schedules and they're on planes to here, there, and everywhere. However, I don't think fatigue can really be blamed for injuries at this point of a season.
Okay, cool. Okay, to expand on this then, lads. I'm just got a couple of sentences here where I look at the style of play we have. We're normally a high possession team. Player stature, we seem to be quite a small team, and we're diminutive, etc. And with that high possession game, we seem to be getting kicked a lot. Gim, do you think that has a big impact on the amount of injuries we get?
Yes, I do. I think you've only got to look at the game against Chelsea to see that Chelsea left the foot in on us pretty much every single tackle. The amount of just petty free kicks that we were given that game because of Chelsea, making those little niggly tackles. And I do think we're susceptible to that as a team with the style that we play. It's very true that they are all short, technical players who like to pass the ball quickly. Going back to what I said about Jack Wilshere and his style of play, it does leave yourself more open to these type of tackles. We do see ourselves, in a physical battle every single game, and it's not necessarily when we win because we just get bossed in that sense, because we are more of a technical team than we are a physical one. So to answer your question, yes, I do think down to style of play and stature of player, it is down partly or partially down to that.
Cool. Dom.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I agree with Gimli on that one. As far as we spoke about it earlier about the size of our players, the type of player we have, the fact that there's not, the big physical presence in the midfield that can sort of break up play when the other opposition have the ball and kick them and leave a foot in and give away a few little niggly fouls and things. And if you look at our wingers as well, there's no one that can kind of drop back into the midfield and do something similar, because you have Theo on one side or Sanchez, and then we know that Podolski and Cazorla aren't exactly the types of players that are going to get in there and knock people off the ball and do too much. So a lot of the pressure has to be soaked up at the back. And when we've got the ball, if you've got the ball, our possession rates are 60% minimum most of the time. Even away against Chelsea, we had more of the ball than they did. And so, logic would state that we're going to have people kicking us more than we're going to have us kicking them. You're going to invite pressure. You're going to invite players to leave a foot in. Something that I wanted to bring up was that I've heard ex-players before say and come out and admit, yeah, when we played Arsenal, the manager told us to kick him. The manager told us to go out there, to leave the footy and to give away fouls, to break up play because they don't like it, because they like to pass the ball around. So you have managers before games saying, right, guys, this is what I want you to go and do. It's not, surely it can't be that much of a surprise to people that we cop a few little extra knocks and niggles and things because of the way that we play. It definitely has a big, a big impact on the knocking type injuries, the impact type injuries, and the Ozil-esque injury from Chelsea.
Yeah, I suppose as well. I will bring this into it. We also, the lack of protection from referees at times. Bearing in mind we've had 3 major leg breaks over the last number of years, etc., and yet still Oscar is just getting warned after 5, fouls, when he could have been booked after the second foul, or he should have been booked after the second foul rather, because Oscar is a dirty bugger by anybody's standards, and yet he's allowed to get away with it. So again, that is obviously a cumulative effect in the situation. Okay, guys.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll just quickly go into that. Yeah, just only because I see things again on social media where people acknowledge that, people identify that. They say, how can this player go 80 minutes before they finally get a yellow card against us? And the Oscar situation was one example, but I can remember a few others throughout the season so far where a player has been, they kind of rotate fouling our players. And if you've got a team like us, that Jack Wilshere or Mesut Ozil or Aaron Ramsey are the barometer of our team. They are what makes us tick. And if you can stop them, if you can hack them down and stop their play, whether it be just not necessarily trying to injure them, but just stopping what they do, you're going to go a long way to stopping Arsenal. And managers know that. Managers, like I said before, they've given instructions to go out and do that. And people identify that, and then you see Arsene Wenger on the touchline going absolutely bananas at the officials saying, why is this happening? Why are they continuously fouling, to the point where he goes over and pushes Jose Mourinho because he's getting so annoyed that the referee's not doing anything about it. And yet then we turn around and blame Arsene Wenger for Mesut Ozil's injury. And yet he's on the touchlines trying to prevent it, saying this isn't good enough. For Christ's sake, give a yellow card so they stop doing it. If you set a precedence early in a match and say, no, that was a deliberate foul, that's the second time you've done it, here's a yellow card, it stops it from happening. And it is player protection. And I think it's something that, like you said, 3 leg breaks to our team over the time from terrible, disgusting fouls it's not a coincidence that it happens to us. It's a deliberate tactic and ploy, and people identify it when they're on Twitter, and then for some reason that gets pushed out of their memory, and then they start the blame game and start blaming our own staff or our own manager, and yet 10 minutes earlier they were identifying that it was a tactic being employed. So I guess that's just where people's frustration comes out and spills out into pointing fingers as an outlet for their frustration, even though 10 minutes earlier they were identifying the problem.
Yeah. Gim, on the same point again, we saw in the North London derby against the scum down the road, we saw a rather bizarre officiating display that day where that Pratt Mason could quite easily have seen red for a certain challenge. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, that's them, isn't it? That's just... Yeah, I mean, you understand that in North London derbies, tensions are high, the will to win is amplified, the crowd is amplified also. Dirty challenges do get made. However, it is purely down to the referee to put his arm around someone and go, listen, any more of that fella, I don't care whether it's 5 minutes into the game or not, you're going to get yourself a red card.
But sorry, I want to push you on this a bit further. Yet Mason stays on the pitch, yet Chambers picked up the cheapest yellow card ever. And again, I'm looking at the inconsistencies rather than the occasion. Do you feel as an Arsenal fan that time and time again, I don't like blaming referee, but sometimes I end up tearing my hair out at what I see is inconsistencies within the standard of refereeing that we seem to get.
No, I definitely agree that you can look back to 3 or 4 of the games that we've had this season, and the referee has been biased. And I'm not looking at that with me Arsenal rose tinteds on. I'm looking at it as someone that watches the game right down the middle. I mean, if if one of our players has made a foul, or say the Koscielny penalty the other day, I turned around to my missus and I was the first one to say, that's a penalty. If one of our players makes a foul, I'm the first one to say, do you know what, that was a nasty challenge. And I don't think we do get the protection from referees that we should do. No, definitely.
Okay, great. Dom, we're going to finish off that section with yourself now.
This is just a quick little example I just thought of then, where you hear managers like Jose Mourinho or even Ferguson, in previous years, say things to the media like, and it's all very tactical, and there's a purpose for the crazy shit that Mourinho says. But he says things like, "Oh, that's Arsenal. They like to dive around. They like to try to trick the referees and make the most of things." He's saying that so that it gets in the referees' heads that when we get fouled, that they don't give penalties or they don't give yellow cards and things, because he wants to be able to get away with using the tactic. So by planting that seed and by saying things in the media and saying things, that the referees are going to hear, it kind of sets a precedence that the referees are going to second guess themselves as well and go, well, oh yeah, that's just the Arsenal players are typical flopping around on the ground. So, there's an aspect to that as well where I think the referees aren't necessarily officiating on each individual case when it comes to, is that a yellow card or is it not? They're looking at things and going, well, it's the 6th minute of the game and, they flop around a bit. So, yeah, okay, well, I'll just let this one off. And then the 80th minute, finally, before a yellow card comes out.
Okay, I'm just going to go one more time. I do apologise on this, guys, because I am wary of the amount of time we've been running for. But again, if you look recently, we've seen on social media stats where we have over 100 days more injuries than the next teams, etc. Surely the FA and the referees must see a correlation between that and the protection our players get.
I don't think that's something that they look at. To be honest with you, I don't think it's something that they're even bothered about, to be honest.
Okay, cool. Dom?
I think, I've got no doubts whatsoever that Arsene Wenger would write please explains after some of those games. And Arsenal on behalf of the manager would be writing to the referees and saying, can you please explain why, like you said, why is this not a yellow card or a sending off and Callum Chambers tugs someone's shirt, but that's a yellow card? Yeah. It's almost just, you need to make the referees accountable for their decisions. And, I'm the last to blame referees. I think even in that Tottenham game, the refereeing was hopeless. But as a team, we were good enough to win regardless of the referees being useless.
Yeah.
So, but as far as player protection goes, I am definitely on the side of making sure that they're doing more to identify when something is a ploy and a tactic used by a team and not falling for it and not letting it happen.
Okay, Gim?
I just wanted to end this by actually saying that I do think in all my years of watching football, I think especially in the last 3 or 4 years, I think the standard of refereeing has gone significantly down. I don't think, I don't know what you guys think about that.
I've got to be honest with you. I think we got some good referees out there and some poor ones. Unfortunately, it's there was a comment made on Sky Sports when John Moss, and it wasn't the game that we played against Everton, though he did referee us against Everton. But I think it's the Chelsea game where they even joked about it. Oh, it's John Moss and Everton, as if they get Everton get everything for him. So I do think there's an issue there, I must admit.
I think even here there are within the players, there are reputations that referees get. You know when a certain referee is refereeing your game, there can be comments made because the players will know or have certain relationships with certain referees. And so I think it's not necessarily down to the referee, not just their decision-making, but it's their player management as well. It's their ability to, like you said, pull the player aside early and say, look, mate, I'm letting you know right now that I'm not having that. And for the player to turn around and go, yeah, whatever, mate, you said that last week and I got away with 5 more before you gave me a yellow. So it's that player management side of things that some referees are probably better at than others as well, and their ability to control a game. I've definitely seen some games where the referees just completely lost control. of the game, and not just Arsenal games as well. So it's not just us that they struggle with, but I think there is an element of referees struggling with understanding or grasping the fact that teams will come out and systematically foul our players, especially our good ones, to stop us doing what we're doing. And I don't think that's something that should be getting away with.
But you do see, Dom, as well. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed it, but players nowadays, when they go up to a referee and they put their arms all over a referee, well, back in the good old days, I thought that if you touch a referee, that was, immediate dismissal. You see,
It
players.
it was a yellow card because there was the Gaza incident in Italy where he tapped him on the back and instant yellow card, even though they were just having a joke.
But you see players, and this is the thing that really annoys me in today's game, like Diego Costa, and I don't think that you can argue that Diego Costa is a good player. He has a reputation that follows him around as a bit of a nasty bastard, and I don't get that the way that he plays is being glorified by pundits and press. When I look at him and I think, fucking hell, you should have been sent off 2 or 3 times this season already. One in particular, when Chelsea played Swansea, Jace, and you'll know it, when he literally...
Phil Sigurdsson.
Yeah, he literally, it just went spark out in the box, and I thought personally, he chucked him to the floor, and this is from memory. But why are players in the game today being able to get away with that?
I don't know, Gim. I think there should be retrospective punishment for that, and regardless of whether the referee has seen it or not, if somebody's done something off the ball, etc., and could injure another player, because it's a livelihood, etc. And the player's an asset to the club, and it's one of those things.
I also think that there are certain ways that the games are officiated, as in if things are picked up by the referee at the time. So say the referee saw Diego Costa do that and he didn't think that was a red card. It was a yellow, for instance. And Swansea then went away and appealed that, saying, Jesus Christ, look what he's done to our player here. And the FA would then write to the club and go, well, the referee felt like he dealt with it at the time. For me, that's not the way that you should be officiating games. If a player has gone in on another player with their studs up and it's a nasty challenge where a player could have been severely injured, then action should be taken whether the referee saw it or not after the game. And there should be sanctions and suspensions handed out to the players.
I can't argue with that, to be honest. I can't. I think that's right. But there we go. So obviously, officiating is no doubt having some knock-on effect to our injury crisis at the moment. We haven't got an answer for it, unfortunately. We know what we'd like to do, but again, the FA are going to continue to ignore that aspect of it. So we're going to go on next. We're going to wrap this up with a final section of fact or fiction. We've seen a number of statements on social media, and we're just going to go through a few of them and give it a fact or fiction answer to it. Sorry. We're going to go, first of all, to the Mesut Ozil injury graph that went round for his injuries at Werder Bremen, his injuries at Real Madrid, and his injuries now at the Arsenal. It's 133 days at the Arsenal, apparently, and there's significantly next to nothing at Real or Werder Bremen. Dom, would you like to have a go at that?
It's fiction for me. He's playing in the Spanish league at Real Madrid, where it's the physicality of that league is absolutely nothing compared to what the Premier League is. He's come into a side where he is the main man, and like I've just said, other teams know that he's going to be kicked from bumhole to breakfast time, and players, opposition teams know that he's the barometer of our team. He's what makes us tick. He's the guy that if he's on form, he's capable of 3 assists and a goal in a game. So he's going to be systematically fouled and targeted, and he would have copped more tackles and knocks in the last 12 months of Premier League football than his whole career combined. And his latest injury, so yes, he had a hamstring injury last season, which was probably preventable by not playing and having a rest, to be honest. But the knee injury that he has now is absolutely nothing to do with being preventable by the club, by him, by anything. It's just one of those injuries that, like I've said before, it's almost like the only way to prevent that is by putting him on the bench and not playing him. But if you said to Arsene Wenger, well, you better put him on the bench, and he says, is he fit? Is he okay? Yeah, then why? Oh, well, he might get injured. So we better not play him. I mean, that's the extent of it. So I think that's just used, a statistic used to, again, if someone has an agenda against the manager or the club or a certain area of the club, they're going to use things like that as a stick to beat the club with, even though it has absolutely no, there's a lot more logical explanation for things like that than straight away that up west we're incompetent. That's, the first thing people want to jump to.
Cool. Gim?
Yeah, I think I'd have to say fiction. I think it's very easy to look at stats and statistics like that, and just draw an easy conclusion. However, I do think there's a lot of what Dom said that was right there. When Mesut Ozil signed for the club, I don't think that there was a single player in the Premier League that probably thought, oh, Jesus Christ, we're going to get an easy ride against him next season or this season. You've only got to see, for the way that he was marked in games, how seriously opposition managers took him. I think a player like Mesut Ozil warrants two defenders, and on a good day he runs rings round both defenders. So I do think, because of the reputation that he brings to Arsenal Football Club, and the reputation that he sustained and had at Real Madrid, he's more susceptible to having challenges against him and from more players, because he's targeted and man marked to more of a degree than, say, other players in that team would be.
Cool. I mean, I find it ludicrous that people want a £42.5 million asset sitting on the bench, and the people make that point in it. If you're playing Chelsea, and they did have two men marking him, you have your best players on the pitch, and I find some of this utter nonsense, I must admit. Okay, so on to the next one, guys. I'm going to start off with you in this game.
Okay.
Soft tissue injuries, are they preventable? I know we've spoken about this earlier, but your honest opinion on it?
That's a very, very tough one. I think, playing time, rotational, feeling knocks and replacing players at the right time, making substitutions at the right time, in that sense they are. However, some hamstrings are just pushed when a player is absolute running up full pout, and it just goes, and that kind of thing isn't preventable to any extent whatsoever. I mean, I'm not a physiotherapist, neither am I a chartered accountant, but I think one man that would probably know more than me and be able to give you more of a clearer answer on that would be Dom.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with a few things that you said, like in general, Gim, where, just like you said, you're more of the quote unquote armchair expert when it comes to this sort of thing. But even you've identified that there are so many factors in a soft tissue injury that it's not just as simple as saying fatigue, or overplayed or overtrained, and that's a fatigue injury. There are so many aspects to the point where it's impossible to know. And not only that, you need to, in this sort of industry, you need to identify every single case individually, and you need to sort of look at it individually before you look at things and think, is there a systematic approach that we can change to stop what's happening? But there's not a crisis, so to speak, at Arsenal, where I would call an injury crisis 8 soft tissue injuries all out at the same time. But we don't have that. We've got impact injuries that are causing us the most grief. So, like I said, you've picked up on the fact that yes, there's depth. The players may be having to play a little bit too much. There are biomechanical issues. There are the fact that we're getting kicked from, start to finish of games. There are, the rotation options that we probably don't have that we should. So there are so many aspects to an injury that you must identify to be able to figure out what it is. I remember, again, this is something I picked up on where, the same similar people were saying, oh, look, Arsene Wenger's even admitted that he's going to have an inquiry into the injury situation at the end of last season. And I laughed. I thought, so what you're saying is that a club a business with multi-million pound assets that are paying these guys hundreds of thousands of pounds a week to play, they get a bunch of injuries and they sit around scratching their heads going, you're trying to tell me that they're not after each individual case going, right, Aaron Ramsey's just gotten injured. What happened? How? When? Where? Give me the numbers. I want to see what happened at the time of the injury. I want to see his numbers and his stats. I want to see how fast he was moving. I want to know everything about it. It's nearly like I do giggle. I actually do laugh when I read some of the tweets sometimes that they think that you look at some of the resumes that some of these guys have got, and you think they're just sitting around playing table tennis, drinking coffee, going, "Oh, what? Someone's injured? 6 weeks." And then they just go back to sipping their cup of tea and playing table tennis again. These are the guys that are at the top of their trade. They doesn't get much better than that. And the way that people make them out to be so incompetent and useless, like it's a bunch of clowns and monkeys smashing tambourines together, running the medical team, it does actually make me laugh. If you really stop and think about it, there is no way that the money that's involved these days that you don't know everything about every injury and every cause why. Arsene Wenger's come out and said we're going to have an inquiry into our injury situation purely just to shut people up.
Yeah. I have no doubt that you're right on that, to be honest, Dave. I think, if you look on the club's website, the guys who are listed, they've worked on for the British Olympic Committee, etc. These aren't unqualified mugs. We're going to have a couple more questions on fact or fiction. I just basically, guys, want a yes or a no on this. The conditioning and training methods at the club, are they behind the times or incompetent? Dom?
Potentially, the last couple of seasons may be, but I don't think that's the case now, no.
Gim?
No, I think neither. They're not behind the times or incompetent. I think when you've got a club like Arsenal Football Club, and you've got people that are in charge of those facilities to make sure that they're the best in the game to compete on that level. So, no, I don't think it is. I think that's a load of old guff.
Cool. The medical team, are they incompetent? I'm going to start with you, Gim.
No, I certainly don't think so. If they were incompetent, then they wouldn't be employed by Arsenal Football Club, would they? I think that's rather a silly question.
These are statements that have been made on Twitter.
Oh no, fair enough.
And I'm just putting them to you guys because they are the extreme end of it. But I think it's been put out there in the public forum. Let's answer it, Dom.
No, there's no chance.
Okay, and the final one: injuries. Are they due to Arsene Wenger being stubborn or out of touch? Dom.
You know what? I'll give credit where it's due, and I'll also criticise where it's due. The injuries that we have so far, other than Arteta's the only one that I'll point at the manager and say it was his stubbornness that probably contributed to the fact that Arteta is now injured by not buying a decent, defensive midfielder. But the centre-back situation with Koscielny's Achilles injuries and Mertesacker's niggles and things, that's also down, I believe, to the manager's stubbornness. But as far as the other injuries that people keep pointing at, where it might be the Aaron Ramsey situation, Jack Wilshere, whoever else, no, absolutely not.
Gim?
The injuries that we've sustained so far, as said in the podcast up to now, you put it right with what Dom said, who is a pro at what he does. No, I don't think it is down to Arsene Wenger so far. However, I do a bit of a Mystic Meg and look in the crystal ball, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that, Koscielny and Mertesacker playing at central defence for most of the season, there's going to be injuries there. Callum Chambers playing a little bit of a role where he's covering, the injured players. He's probably going to end up playing as many games as Koscielny and Mertesacker will of a season. So I think in the foreseeable future, yes, maybe it could be down to Arsene Wenger, but that's also down to him in January to address those problems and strengthen where it needs to be. Anything after that he's not strengthened and we get an injury because of overplaying, yes.
Great. Guys, I don't think it can be fairer than that. I really don't. I think that's a pretty honest summation of where we are. I'd like to thank you both for coming on today. You've both been fantastic.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for hosting, Jace. You've been wonderful.
You have been wonderful. Do you know what? I'm sat here, I'm crapping myself. I'll tell you what, if you go into Danny's office tomorrow morning and you apply for my job, then I'm going to punch you.
Nah, no, you're all right. It's a one-off, boys. It's a one-off. Yeah, to be honest with you guys, I'm sorry this has rolled on a bit longer than we actually planned. But again, we wanted to give you an injury special, which really looked at things in depth, and we gave you an answer to the questions that were going around. We tried to cover all the Facebook questions and the things that have been said on social media in an honest fashion. Dom is a professional. Gimli's representing the fans. None of us have insights into how the club, the inner workings of the club and the medical teams and the sports and conditioning. But we do have an idea, and Dom is a pro, understands exactly what Forsythe and the guys do. You know, he does work with professional sports clubs down under. And that's what we've got for you. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's not a fun one. It's not a fun subject. But thank you for listening, and keep it Arsenal. Goodbye.
Ta-da.
Bye!
Oh, the monkeys are out now.